Hello, everyone. Do you know that sex trafficking has been in all 50 states of the United States, and more than 80% of the victims are U.S. citizens? You are now watching the Human Trafficking Awareness Series sponsored by Hope PYX Global. Welcome to the Miss Texas Show. The Miss Texas Show showcases the amazing survivors of traumatic events, family violence, sex trafficking, sexual abuse, and invite our community leaders to share their community resources. Under our segment of military time, we invite military and veterans who would like to share with us their experiences during and after their military services. We run this segment in partnership with the National Veterans Chamber of Commerce. Under our beauty segment, we invite our fellow pageants, artists, such as musicians, actors, who are ambassadors for the causes to come on and share their platforms and the amazing impact that they are making in the communities. If you would like to be a guest on the show, you can reach us on Facebook, and the Facebook name is Miss USA Texas. It's MSUSA Texas. Or you can email us on missusatexas@gmail.com. Now, today, without further ado, we have a very special guest. Our special guest is Miss Vicki Jackson. Welcome, Vicki.
Thank you so much.
I love your smile, love your positive energy, Vicki. Vicki has done so much for our communities, and she is truly a community leader. And as far as I understand, you have also served in the army. So she has also helped develop the RCCASA commercial sexual exploitation of child, which is the CSA program. And this is very well known in the sex trafficking industry, I call. And she has also developed and ran the Richard County Anti-Human Trafficking Task Force. She has assisted the LA Regional Anti-Human Trafficking Task Force and developed a speakers bureau. And she has so many achievements with all the hard work that you're doing to help us making sure that our families, our children are safe from from these crimes. Now, without further ado, I'm gonna hand the mic to you. Tell us a little bit about how did you get involved?
So I kind of fell into the work of human trafficking. I started my journey with in South Carolina with Richland County Court Appointed Special Advocacy Guardian Ad Litem program. So they're called RC CASA. And I served a myriad of roles while I was there: a supervisor, a volunteer, a paid guardian. It was crazy. And so we got handed our very first CASA case, and I became the CASA volunteer on that. And our young lady was placed outside of the state, and I had thought the Department of Social Services caseworker was visiting her, but because of bureaucracy, she wasn't able to go. So I realized that my kid was out of state, away from family, not seeing anybody. So out of my own pocket, I paid to go visit her and visit her once a month, because I was obligated by the courts to see them once a month. When they're closer, I try to see them more frequently. But I would go and stay overnight and at least have breakfast, lunch, dinner, with her and visit with her until we could get her locally. And then I worked with the Attorney General's office in helping prepare her for her case and things like that. And so we learned a lot. There were a few things we did wrong, some things we did really well, and we learned how to work really well together. And so while I started doing that, we then developed a human trafficking task force. And after my case was over, I actually left for a little while and then came back to CASA and stepped into the human trafficking task force role, where I branded it. And when we got orders to move, we had about 80 members, and I think now it's flourishing. There's another individual. We moved to California for a year, which is where I did the work out there. My husband's military. He's a bandmaster for the Army, and so he got to do training with industries where he learned production management with Disneyland for a year. So that was pretty awesome. And then they sent us to Virginia, which is where I currently live, where he's now teaching the stuff that he's learned at the Army School of Music.
Oh wow, this kind of experience. I know that with military you have to travel a lot, so you've been to like so many different places, making so many different impact. I know I became aware of CC when I got involved with the human trafficking, anti-human trafficking force myself. So what exactly, like how did you start with CC?
Yeah, so what I did is I read a book that was called Start Something to End Trafficking, I think is the title of it. It's close to that. I'll have to get the actual title for you. But it really told me how to build a coalition, what to do. And then I started just pulling a bunch of resources and going to the experts out in the field. And just asking them, different questions about what's going on, what do we, how do I start? I'm starting from scratch. Where do I need to focus? And I think the best advice I ever got was that this is a marathon, not a sprint, and that I am not missing out, and that there is no reason to hurry up, that everybody starts at a certain level, and if I can just build upon that, you'll eventually get the information. So with the military, I got to learn how South Carolina was doing things. Then I went out to California. I've been able to bring some of that to Virginia. And so just really, now I've been doing this for about 7 years. My motto and what I live by is that I don't like people to reinvent the wheel. So if there's anything that I've already done, I'll be more than glad to share those resources to help bring people forward, so that maybe we can either all be together or at least help them to get a little bit further. Because no matter how much, there's tons of awareness that needs to go on. There's lots of policies and procedures that need to be developed. But in this community, we all work really well together. And that was one thing that I thought was great, was people were always willing to share their knowledge and their information.
That's very well said. Thank you for all the hard work that you have been doing. It is also my belief that we have to join our forces and utilize each of our strengths so that we can fight this together. This is not a competition amongst different individuals, philanthropists, whether advocates, survivors, and or organizations, nonprofit or not, because this is a $115 billion industry. It takes all of us and all of our effort and commitment to fight this together. So thank you so much for what you're doing. I'm really excited. So what are you doing now? Tell us about that.
So in January of this year, I started my own LLC called Empowering Others. It's an independent consulting company, and I landed a contract with Lighthouse for Life in South Carolina, and I'm helping them to build a program that will work with non-residential survivors. So Lighthouse for Life has a residential side. They'll be opening real soon for minor girls. It's a house, a safe house for 3 minor girls. I'm working with another survivor in building a program that will create support emotionally, and also running a survivor support group, and then helping survivors get connected in the community, because a lot of survivors will move into the area and not know the resources that are available. So we've created an entire database. I've done all of their awareness trainings. I've developed all the curriculum for that. And then when I started 7 years ago, what I was really looking for was somebody to kind of validate the information I was out there. So we've developed a train to trainer model, where we train individuals on how to present the information. And we started with medical providers. And so I was really excited because recently I just trained somebody in Houston, Texas. His name's Greg Williams. Dr. Gregory Williams. He wrote Shattered by Darkness. And I got to train him on our curriculum as well. And I'm hoping that he'll be able to take it through Baylor University. So that's kind of one of the things we want to do is it's very time intensive to build these PowerPoints and build this information. And I like to do a lot of research. So anytime I can share that information with others, I will do that.
That is wonderful. Yes, I am based out of Houston, Texas, and as many of you know, that is the medical center of the country. And yes, and we actually do have a medical coalition per se that are medical service providers and that provide services to survivors. And it is very important for them to be trauma informed so that they can provide the service that the survivors really need, because a lot of the times survivors are not getting the connection and they're not opening up for the service that they truly desire or they truly need or they truly even are open to receive the service for. So that is awesome. I'm so excited. We will be linking the information in the content section so that you'll be able to watch out for more of those information as well. So now, according to the clients or the survivors that you've been working with, what age range, what demographics, what gender? Tell us more about your experience working with the survivors.
Yes. So I've in just the last several months have really seen a lot with adults, but we see it on both avenues. We see it both in children and in adults. I always they have the average age, but what I say is that most individuals have gotten involved in human trafficking or in adolescence, because that's such an important time period where we want to be accepted and we want to be loved, and so they're very vulnerable at that age. So traffickers will go after them at that age. I've seen the adults, and what I've seen with most adults, I read a lot of survivor stories because I like to see what they identify as something might be broken, and if I can figure out if I can fix it or find others to fix it. So I love to read survivor stories, and most of the survivor stories that I've read, they were sexually abused. So with our young kids, I try to bring awareness around if you get a case and the child's been sexually abused, you really need to surround them with a bunch of services. Not only is that trauma informed care piece important, but also teaching them better boundaries because their boundaries have been violated. We've seen we've only had women right now, but we do know that it has impacted boys and men. I just think that it's underrepresented or underreported because we don't have our screening tools aren't really geared towards identifying men, and then with the stigma of that, and a lot of them don't report. But I do know that it is happening to boys and men everywhere. But we just started collecting the data and really developing this program in around June this year, and so, or actually the beginning of this year. And so this year we have worked with 10 survivors, and of them, they were all females and they were all adults. But I know when we get our doors open for the Harris home, which is going to be the safe home for the minor girls that we'll see. And we get many calls that are involving minors. We just don't work with the minors right now.
That is correct. The statistics shows that anyone can be a victim of human trafficking regardless of their age, their gender, their nationality, race, social or economic status. So it's very unfortunate that boys and men are also victims of this very bad crime. And we just needed to have the system to fill in all the gaps so that more people and everyone can get the service that they needed the help for. Yeah.
Absolutely. I say human trafficking preys on vulnerabilities, and every single one of us has a vulnerability. If you love anything or anyone at all, that's a vulnerability that can be eventually used against you. So you're 100% correct. It knows no bounds. It definitely will. They'll just, whoever has a vulnerability that they can exploit, they'll find a way to do that.
So share with us, without going into details, if you can, you feel free to. but of the 10 female adults that you have been collecting data with, or through the past years that you've been working, whether with the task force or CSA, all those survivors that share with us about how did they get into that. I know every story is different, but share with our audience, because some of them might not know anything about human trafficking. I myself, before I got into it, I thought it was a lot of foreigners uh, kind of smuggled on the container ship and come here. That's my interpretation of human trafficking. So please share with us about those stories.
Yeah, and I did the same thing. I thought it only happened internationally, and found out it was happening here domestically. And through the 7 years that I've been doing this, most victims don't realize they're victims until they eventually get out of the life. And what a lot of the stories are, while they're each individually unique, there is a similarity in that there was a guy who came along who wooed them and made them feel special, and told them they loved them and said they would do anything to protect them. And then some of the women I've worked with were involved in maybe in more vulnerable jobs like stripping, and so they would come in and prey on that and then eventually lead them to somehow coercing them into having sex with somebody for money, and then telling them that they owe them something, or however, but they keep them with that shame, like they shame them for what they've done, or they blame them, or no one's going to believe you because you were involved in stripping or you were in prostitution. And I always tell everybody like that our society really says that prostitution is a choice. And I know that there's a small population out there that really believe that they're choosing that lifestyle, but I'd like to challenge the fact that they were probably injured or hurt in some way that they think that that is okay. And as long as we have a demand for it, there's always going to be that there. But individuals who've gotten involved in prostitution have most likely had some type of circumstances that has led them to thinking that is the only way that they can bring an income. And so that's where I kind of call it the exploitation, whether they're exploiting themselves or someone else is exploiting them. Although I want to caveat that if they are a minor, if they're under the age of 18, in most states, there is no such thing as a child prostitution. And federally, that's how it is. And I would love for all states to recognize that so that we aren't arresting minors for prostitution because they're being exploited. And so just kind of bringing awareness to that piece to it, where getting rid of the word choice and looking at it for what it is.
Well, yes. I know that we have a long journey ahead of us. We have, January is the Human Trafficking Awareness Month, and a whole bunch of organizations and individuals like ourselves are, trying to educate people about these things. And I think we have a lot of work to do. For instance, about the 18-year-old or underage children and their prostitution and the policies and things like that. It is very unfortunate. I know that about, I would say, a couple months ago, several months ago, I interviewed an attorney based out of New York City on the Boy Scout of America claim. I'm sure you might be aware of, for the sexual assault. And one of the common things, even though that does not fall into prostitution, the common sense is about the vulnerability, as you have mentioned. And whether they come from a family that is very well off and that they are provided and they have both parents and still together, they could still feel the lack of support from their parents, let alone the ones that are with their single parents who are busy trying to support the life of themselves and the children. And then it's very easy, just like you said, to be lured by a man who falls into, whether we call sugar daddy or whatever, to give them the false impression that they are loved, and to give them the love that they have never experienced before. And I know that in the conversation we have also talked about how children or adults later on after this traumatic events. It impacts their life hugely. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Like, the survivors that got out of it. You mentioned about not only the trauma informed services from the provider, but you also talk about the survivors themselves. It's it's a lifelong journey to recover. So tell us more about what impact it has made to the survivors, and what uh, just an average person, whether it's in a grocery store and they see a person maybe breaking down for no reason, maybe a trigger. Um, what are those things that you have dealt with?
Absolutely. It's constant, triggers that they have to be, that they don't even aren't aware of. One thing that we give out freedom bags for to DSS, to Department of Social Services, to law enforcement, for when they do rescue someone that has clothes in there, and was brought to our attention not to put in hotels shampoos and conditioners, because that could be a trigger, because a lot of the survivors have been trafficked out of a hotel. And I think sometimes misconceptions out there are that trafficking needs to indicate movement, but it doesn't have to. They can have one person and multiple men coming in and out of the hotel room, and that's still considered trafficking. That's where I say there's three parties involved: a victim, the sex buyer, and the trafficker. And then with exploitation, which sometimes we don't always see the trafficker, you have the sex buyer and the victim. And so kind of being aware of that. And then, of course, there's labor trafficking as well, and they're bringing more and more awareness around that. That's impacting migrant workers, and so it can happen anywhere. It can happen in neighborhoods, in the residential areas. It can happen in massage parlors, in hotels, in restaurants. It can happen everywhere. And so just being aware of what the signs are, and being aware of the human trafficking hotline number, which is 1-888-3737. 1-888-3737. I think I said that right, but we can put that, make sure it's up so that I'm giving the correct telephone number. But having that in your cell phone is a really key piece to it, because if you suspect anything, it's not up to us to be the ones to decide, but to report it. And you don't even know if maybe somebody else has reported it, or it's an area that law enforcement is kind of looking at already. So you're giving them extra clues. Try to get as much detail as you possibly can, and don't approach the individual, because you don't know if that trafficker is across the street. You could actually get them in trouble. You could get yourself in trouble. So just try to get as much information as you can. And then also, when they're over the age of 18, law enforcement has to prove forced fraud or coercion. But sometimes there isn't always the outward scars that are involved that individuals have. It's a psychological or a trauma bond that they have with that trafficker, kind of like Stockholm syndrome. And so there's times that they just think, oh, well, I was choosing that. And then the more that they go into counseling, the more that they reveal it, they realize that it wasn't a choice, that they were being forced into doing those things. And so I think helping attorneys and judges understand that psychological hold, I think, is a really key piece to it. And also working with other individuals so that we're not constantly doing victim blaming, and being the ones that are blaming the victims, rather than going after the buyer or the trafficker.
Yes, that's very good that you mentioned about victim blaming, because, like you said, a lot of the victims, they don't realize they're victims, and in the areas that I am advocate against sex trafficking, domestic violence, sexual assault, and the statistics shows that victims of domestic violence and sexual assault are more likely to be trafficked because of those vulnerability that we have discussed earlier. And unfortunately, a lot of the survivors that I've been working with as well, they've mentioned like not until they go into the support group, they didn't know that they're a victim. They thought they were, I mean, whether it was an intimate relationship or maybe it was a marriage, they thought they were happily married until years after they gone through the support group. They're like, oh my God, I didn't know, he was a narcissist, or a different situation, and it's all completely different. And it's very unfortunate that human trafficking, whether it's sex trafficking, labor trafficking, are coerced, but this trauma bonding part makes it kind of difficult to identify that. But thank you for mentioning about not do the victim blaming, because I think it's really important. And that's in addition to the triggers, I think that's a big part that helps with the healing journey of the survivors. Now,
Absolutely.
yeah. So now you mentioned about recognizing the signs for an average person. So what are the signs?
So it's, if you see an individual who suddenly has expensive things that they normally don't have, what I do a lot, especially with youth, is if they're getting their nails done and their hair done, and I don't think they really have the finances to do that, especially with kids, if they have multiple cell phones. I always say, I'm not sure teenagers need cell phones, period, but that was back in the day, but to have more than one is definitely a red flag. If you see any cases where the kids have been sexually abused, they have a history of running away, they have a history with the Department of Juvenile Justice, those are all really massive red flags, because that in itself is, they may be running away from something or they're running towards something. And so we've got to really ask ourselves what's going on, rather than just being like, oh, they just ran away. And it's like, technically, they're missing from care. Like, I think that we need to get rid of the word runaway and say missing from care, because do you really know where they are? No, then they're missing from care, and we need to report them.
I like that terminology. We should put that in as well. Missing from care. Very well said. Yeah. So a lot of of our audience, if they see those and recognize the signs, and you've mentioned a hotline, and what would you suggest? Are the things that they could do?
Absolutely. You can also report it to your local law enforcement. Most states have some type of human trafficking task force, so you can look up the information. Again, the National Human Trafficking Hotline has, they have a really great resource, and they also have text be free. Again, I was going to pull up the number here and get you the exact number for it. So the human trafficking hotline number is 888-373-7888. I didn't say it correctly earlier. And then again, if you have your local law enforcement looking that up, but you can also go to their website and they've got a ton of information on there as well. But they're national and they are linked into the local state task force for each state as well.
Yeah, I believe that when you click on the link, you can also whether search by yourself for the local resources, or the hotline will be able to provide the information of wherever the local vicinity is and are. But yeah,
Absolutely.
that is very useful resources, and make sure that you do uh, program this number in your phone, 1-888-3737-888, in your phone, and we will be linking that information in the content section below as well, so that you'll be able to connect and make sure with the resources in case you see the signs, or whether it is someone that you know or you don't know. Unfortunately, like we mentioned earlier in the beginning of the show, that 80% are US citizens. And it has been reported in all the 50 states in the United States. It is a $150 billion industry that that we need to be aware of, and we need to put an end to it, because these are happening in our backyard. And these are our, unfortunately, whether woman, man, and a lot of them are actually children. So these are actually our people that we need to protect against. So now, Vicky, tell us, about the task forces, and you've worked with Richardson County with the LA task forces. What did you do over there?
So with Richland County Task Force, I led that for over a year, and we we had three subcommittees that we really focused on: prevention, protection, and prosecution. We brought in a couple of different times. We brought in Amber Alert partners with Fox Technical Valley, and they have a high risk victims model training. That's a 2-day training and then a 3-day law enforcement training. And so when we first really rebranded the task force and launched it, we brought them in, and they have law enforcement that talk to them. And the high risk victims model is that they flag any kids that have run 3 or more times, and they really look at those cases. And so Richland County changed the way they started looking at that, and they've now got volunteers that will follow up with those kids. Well, one, they have a couple of, like, 2 law enforcement that are the ones that go and get the kids that have run away, so that they get familiar with that police officer, and that police officer gets familiar with their cases. And then they have some volunteers who can follow up and make sure they're getting the counseling that they need, and find out if mom or dad needs a little bit of assistance. Because, like you said, some of them are coming from single parent homes, and their parents are doing the best that they can, and the kids have had some type of situation that's happened to them. And so they're acting out, but people just think, oh, they're just being delinquent. And the reality of it is, and I tell this to people when we train, is it's not what's wrong with you, it's what happened to you. So when our kids are acting out with behaviors, we need to figure out what is causing that behavior. It's not that they're choosing to be angry. Angry is a secondary emotion. And so they want to you want to look and see what that is a result of. And like I said, some of them have been sexually abused and just never disclosed that information. And so just being really in tune to what's going on, and rather than just labeling the child as being bad, of looking at and seeing that there's something else indicating that.
It's like the victim blaming syndrome that we talked about earlier, right?
Yes.
Yes, yes, and especially these children, I forgot the age exactly. I think it was under maybe 14. That their brain are not fully developed yet, so we can't really blame them for these things. And as a matter of fact, they think that they are making the best judgment at that age, but because it's not fully developed, and that's a shame that they're not getting the proper care that they're needing. But their parents, especially the single parents, are doing the best to provide for them, and then it is hard. It's a responsibility to bring up a child or children. So this is very, very difficult. And what about the LA County?
So I sat on their task force, and then I also helped assist. They were putting together a speakers bureau where they had like one formal presentation, and so I helped edit that and helped add a few things to their slides and helped them get that curriculum up and going. And then when I left, they were training individuals to go throughout the LA area to do awareness programs and things like that.
Yeah,
Oh,
because
and then I guess also I trained the LA CASA, Court Appointed Special Advocates. I trained some of their supervisors on the signs of human trafficking. And then I also trained Orange County CASA volunteers on what to look for.
yes, yes, because the according to the city and the states and the victim numbers, California is number one. We're in Houston, so citywide, Houston is number one. Statewide, Texas is number two. And you mentioned that your husband, you guys were working with Disney. I'm not sure if it was Disneyland or Disney World. Was that Disneyland?
It was Disneyland, yes.
Disneyland, yes, because Disney World falls into the third number state, that is Florida. So these are all like high risk states. However, as mentioned earlier many times, 50 states, all 50 states has been reported. And so yeah, these are great work that you have done, like so great work that you have been able to work throughout different states, and therefore have the different information firsthand information, working with the task forces, working with the survivors, and all of the above. Now, for the viewers of this show, and for those who are joining later, this is the Miss Texas show, and we highlight the amazing lives of our survivors from traumatic events, human trafficking, sexual assault, and domestic abuse. And this is the special month of January Human Trafficking Awareness Month shows. So yes, tell us more about what they can do. What is the takeaway for them?
You know, really paying attention to your kids, watching what they're, monitoring what they're doing on the internet, telling them that you love them, showing them that you care for them. Our kids really want our presence, not our presence. Although they think that they like gifts and they want us to buy things, but we can't buy our time. So any little bit of time that you can spend, dads that are out there, take your little girls out on dates and teach them how to have a healthy relationship with an adult. I've heard interviews of the perpetrators, and they say that the minute their relationship gets sexual, it goes secretive, and that they really advise adults to pay attention to a child. If a child's talking overly or talking a lot about another adult, that's a red flag, right? Like, I don't know kids that hang out with adults and adults that hang out with kids all the time, so really being careful of that, teaching your kids, there's no longer the days of stranger danger, because a lot of times it's somebody that the child knows that is perpetrated on them. So teaching them that individuals are strangers out of context. So the example of that is like a teacher. Kids know their teachers in class, but if they go to the grocery store and they see their teacher and their teacher asks them to step outside, that teacher now becomes a stranger because they don't know them in the context of the store. So really teaching them those questions, and then really teaching them to understand intuition. When your stomach says something doesn't feel right, trust that. And teach them that no with a period at the end of the sentence is a complete sentence, and they don't have to explain themselves. Don't force your kids to hug other people if they don't want to. Teach your children boundaries. Teach them that if you're tickling them and they say no, stop. And then you say, okay, you want to start again? Tickle them again. No, stop. You need to honor that. Those are little things that eventually could lead up to them not realizing the importance of their no.
Yes, the boundary is really important. I believe. The perpetrators or the pimps. Where do they get to the victims or children? You mentioned the internet. Are there some websites or social media apps that you would like to mention to our audience?
Yes, there's multiple platforms. So being careful about who your kid's friend on Facebook. Just because somebody wants to be their friend doesn't mean that they know them. There's Snapchat. There's Backpage, where they have been known to solicit sex on there. There's hidden calculator apps that actually kids can hide pictures behind the calculator apps. So really researching the types of applications, putting restrictions on the cell phone so that you know what they're downloading. I tell my son, he's 14, I'm like, until you're 18, that cell phone is ours, and we can pick it up and look at it at any time. What you see on your computer, we can pick up at any time. Placing your computer in an area where you are all the time so that you can kind of glance and see what they're looking at, monitoring what the pop-up ads are. And if they do get exposed to some type of pornography, having conversations with them without shaming them, and then getting them the proper counseling and things like that to help them to deal with that. Because the internet's not only grooming the next victim, but it's grooming the next sex buyer. And if we shame them and we, make a big deal out of them seeing sex on the website, then it's just going to go secretive and it's going to become an issue. But educating them beforehand too, of saying, if you ever see anything like this, let us know. But there's tons of resources out there that you can get that will help you to monitor what your children are doing on the internet.
Yeah, I think that's very important that you mentioned about they're not just shaming the victims but also the sex buyers, because I think um, we need to kind of like end this on both ends. One is the buyer, one is the seller. So the supply and the demand. So we need to end both the supply and the demands by educating the supply and also trying to stop the buyers. And yes, that's very well said. In terms of buyers, what are the signs that you see about the buyers, their demographics, what industries are they in, and what situations are they in?
Yeah, it's kind of like a trafficker. It's like a victim. Anybody could be a sex buyer. It could be a man. It could be a woman. It could be anybody. And it's there's professionals out there. There's individuals who have recently been busted on the news that has been purchased, that has purchased sex. So it really is it can be anybody, like you said. And I really, really, in my heart of hearts, the start of it is the access to pornography. And then that addiction to pornography leads to them eventually purchasing sex. But it's kind of like when they purchase an individual for sex, it's almost like playing Russian roulette, because eventually they're going to purchase someone who's a minor, whether they mean it or not. And so we really have to get stricter laws around purchasing individuals for sex. And we need to have stricter laws around trafficking, and really getting in more and more resources to help the survivors and to help women who may have been involved in prostitution or have been involved in pornography or any of that stuff. And instead of, like we talked about, instead of shaming them, looking at what happened to them and getting them the services that they need without it being a shame-based service.
Are there any particular industries, I guess, I would imagine, for instance, in Houston, Texas, it's not only the medical center, but also the oil and gas center. So we have a lot of oil and gas companies that people are traveling on per diem, or, the service companies of the oil and gas companies, for instance, the truckers. So there are like different groups that are targeting these buyers. So, are there any particular industry of people that us or the viewers are watching the signs, on both ends? One is the buyer, one is the seller. As far as the buyer's side can recognize the people and or the signs.
Yeah, I mean, especially in hotels, you can educate the staff in hotels of, if there's an individual staying in a hotel but always keeps their disturb sign all the time, the whole time they're there, or housekeeping comes in to empty out their trash and they find lots and lots of wrappers of condom wrappers in there, or there's it's just little things like that. Like, I've just noticed that there's a lot of people coming in and out of that hotel room. Maybe I need to ask some more questions. Just looking at that. And I mean, you're right. Whenever there's big events, people with big pockets come in, and of course, they end up drawing people who buy other individuals. And there are several research articles out there that have proven that the Super Bowl, the ads for sex increase around large events like the Super Bowl or like Bike Week in Myrtle Beach. So those events. And so when you have a lot of tourism, you have a lot of people traveling that aren't there, very long. They're looking for a companion, I guess you could say. I don't know, for lack of a better word. And then that's the people that they're going to target. So again, like you said, as long as there's a supply, as long as there's a demand, they're going to provide that supply for it.
Yes, yes. Over here, like, we have OTC, the offshore technology conference that is specific for the oil and gas industry. I know that this year it has been canceled due to COVID, but I mean, 2020 has been canceled due to COVID. I'm not sure about the 2021 plans, but these are like the big pockets and the events. So there's the money and there's the buyer. So these are big target, items that people are looking for. I know we also have rodeo. I forgot, I had one of the guests talking about how many million or billion-dollar industry that is once a year, and the vendors are in there just working the whole year just waiting for that event, and that event got canceled because that was the beginning of the COVID as well. So these are all like big events, and I really urge all of you, for whatever the local events that you all have locally. I imagine, I'm not sure, quote me if I were wrong, maybe the Kentucky Derby would be like another big event that, people will be targeting all the buyers, and therefore, people will get victimized and or get trafficked into this industry. So just like Vicky said, keep an eye on watching on the signs for both the victim side and the buyer side. And also, do not play victim blaming when you do see the signs. If that's someone that is your children, for instance, or someone that is your family, get them the proper help that they need. And also the 800 number, 1888 number of the hotline that you need to program in your phone as well. So, is there anything you would like to tell our audience for the takeaway, Vicky?
So I think that this work, obviously, this work is really hard to do, and I'm very, very passionate for it because these are voiceless individuals who need a voice, and I want to be that voice for them. So what I really do is I really take heart the starfish story, where one day a young boy was playing on or was on the beach, and a storm had come in and washed up all these starfish on the beach, and an old man was watching him, and from a distance he was picking them up and throwing them back in the ocean. And so the old man walked up to him and said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "All these starfish are going to die if they don't go back in the ocean." And he looked and he said, "So I'm throwing them back in the ocean." And he said, "You're never going to make a difference. There's thousands of starfish." And the little boy picked up the starfish, looked at the old man, threw in the ocean, and looked back and said, "But I made a difference to that one." And so
Oh,
that's what I do. And I know that anything we do, that reporting, that phone call, that compliment to that young person, being in someone's life, or just letting them know how important they are to you, is going to make that difference. And so if we can just hold on to that starfish, because we don't know who that starfish is going to be, and we take care of that starfish, and someone else comes along and takes care of another one, before you know it, we've gotten all those starfish off the beach, and they're able to survive.
that is beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, Vicky. Thank you for your time. Thank you for all you do. Really, I know 2020 has been a difficult year for all of us who are advocating, fighting against this terrible crime. And I feel like, 2021 is going to be a better year. And I always believe that whenever there's difficulties, there's also opportunities. And because of COVID, so many organizations and individuals like ourselves have moved from, in addition to in person, but now virtual. And this enables us, you and I, like you're in Virginia, I am in Texas, and we are able to connect just as if we're in the same room. And for the same reason, so many people can, from around the world, can get educated just with a click from the internet. So I really appreciate that all you do and all the information, like we said, we are going to link the information that we have mentioned earlier in the content section below. And if you're watching this, this is the Miss Texas show again, the Human Trafficking Awareness Month special series. And if you like this show, make sure that you like and most importantly share and subscribe to the channel because we have a lot of educational programs coming up so that we can help educate and bring more awareness and most importantly prevention to end this crime. And thank you again for your time, Vicky, for this special educational session to educate all of our viewers.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.